Ukraine has a secret weapon. Never before seen and absolutely lethal, this weapon has been causing hell for Russia in Crimea. The peninsula is supposed to be under Putin's control, but as this weapon crashes down on the Crimean land bridge over and over, turning it into a highway to hell, that control looks looser than ever. The R280 has become a graveyard. Crimea is ready for the taking as the peninsula's liberation moved from pipe dream to inevitability, and it's all thanks to Morrigan. Those who know their mythology may know Morrigan as the Celtic goddess of war, fate, and perhaps most tellingly, change. That's what Ukraine is looking to create in Crimea after over a decade of Russia illegally ruling over the peninsula. A transformation of the fate of a parcel of territory that nobody thought Ukraine would ever be able to touch again. Morrigan isn't just a name, it's a message, delivered from the skies, that is now playing a crucial role in Ukraine's strategy of isolating Crimea in preparation for the liberation to come. We didn't know about it when the Crimean land bridge came under fire. Now we do, and it's all thanks to the 412th Nemesis Brigade. The brigade has published footage on Facebook shows exactly what the Morrigan drone is capable of doing. The mid-range weapon is allowing Ukraine to batter Crimea in the arteries that keep the Russian occupiers supplied. Military logistics are going up in flames, key supply routes are being rendered unusable. A goddess of war has taken to the skies, and she's wreaking havoc on Russia. The Nemesis Brigade is the perfect unit to expose the existence of this drone, as it had a vital role to play in its development. United 24 Media reports that the Morrigan is co-developed with the brigade, with the implication being that this is a drone designed for the specific purpose of retaking Crimea. The Nemesis Brigade knows what it takes to hurt Russia deep behind the lines. Morrigan has been built to spec, designed to be as lethal as possible and to turn the roads in the occupied territories into highways to hell. The results are now there for all to see. The footage that the Nemesis Brigade published shows Morrigan drones unleashing their fiery fury on Russian military trucks across the R280 Novorossiya highway. We see footage shot from the drones themselves, suggesting that they are essentially FPV drones with longer ranges than those typically seen on the front. The video gives us the briefest look at the Morrigan itself, though not so much that its secrets are given away. But the highlights are the strikes. Over and over, we see the Morrigan do what it was designed to do, zero in on a target and then take it out. The Nemesis Brigade calls the drone a game changer. Frankly, it's hard to argue. What Ukraine has on its hands is a drone that is destroying a key lifeline that Russia relies on to maintain its grip over Crimea. The R280 land bridge is under threat. Scratch that, it's already being rendered useless. Ukraine is choking off Russia's Crimea logistics in a strategy that is designed to first isolate, then to liberate. The burning carcasses of military vehicles that now litter the R280 show us that the Morrigan is as effective as it is symbolic. We're starting to see a shift in Crimea, and with the Morrigan that shift could be extended to other regions of Ukraine. But before we get to that, the question has to be asked, what do we know about the Morrigan drone so far? The answer is precious little. That's pretty much the point when it comes to secret weapons. Ukraine doesn't want to say too much, else Russia will learn how the Morrigan works and either create its own version or come up with a way to counter the drone. However, we do know that the drone has been designed for supreme maneuverability, allowing it to carry out rear area interdiction missions against key military assets that Russia has placed in the occupied territories. We also know, thanks to the Nemesis Brigade, that the drone is part of a scheme involving the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and Ukraine's unmanned systems forces to develop a new class of mid-range weapons that increase Ukraine's operational depth. Beyond that, the Nemesis Brigade says it's not giving anything else away. This is so far all the details we can voice without unnecessary risk, the brigade declares, adding, "The rest must stay outside the public space in order for the Ukrainian middle strike to continue to work effectively." What little else we can glean about this drone has to come from an analysis of the video that the Nemesis Brigade shared. There is clearly an FPV aspect to the drone. The footage shows Morrigan drones recording what's in front of them as they hone in on their targets, so we can assume that there are operators involved. Whether AI and automatic targeting are in the mix is unconfirmed. We also don't know how much firepower the Morrigan packs, though it's clearly enough to take out tanks and military vehicles. Every so often, the footage from the Nemesis Brigade shows explosions caused by the drone, and they are large enough to suggest that the Morrigan carries a little more than the 3 kilograms or so of explosive packed into a typical FPV drone. So the Morrigan hits harder than the drones that litter the front. How much harder hasn't been confirmed. Business Insider tries to glean a few more details in its analysis of the Nemesis Brigade's video. It says that an early clip of the Morrigan being readied for flight suggests that it's likely somewhere between 4 and 5 feet long. The drone has a pair of tail fins, swept wings, and perhaps most interestingly, it doesn't appear to need a runway to take off. We see the drone being launched from what appears to be either a slingshot or a rail, which is a massive plus for Ukraine. It means that the Morrigan can be launched from almost anywhere without forcing Ukraine's drone operators to find a patch of runway that would leave them exposed to counterattacks. Finally, there's the range. We don't know the specifics, but we do know that the R280 highway that Ukraine has been shattering with the Morrigan is between 80 and 100 kilometers away from the front lines, depending on where Ukraine hits it, and that it runs from the Russian region of Rostov-on-Don through Mariupol and Melitopol and then into Crimea. So we can assume a range of at least 120 kilometers. But so far, this is all we know or can speculate about. One thing is for certain, the hunt is on, and the R280 is being transformed from a land bridge lifeline for Russia into a hellscape where military vehicles are being destroyed. What does this mean for Crimea? We'll be answering that question in a moment, but before we do, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you're getting insight from this video, remember to subscribe to catch more of our analysis of Ukraine's latest weapons and strategies. So, Crimea. Putin has some pretty major problems right now in a peninsula that he illegally annexed back in 2014. A region that is supposed to represent Russia's superiority over Ukraine has now been turned into a hunting ground for the Morrigan and an entire generation of mid-range drones that are tearing through Russian logistics. As we speak, the Morrigan is conducting logistical hunt from Mariupol to Crimea, the Nemesis Brigade declares, and it has already destroyed dozens of Russian trucks and gas stations along the R280 over the last couple of weeks. That land corridor has been turned into a black hole where Russian logistics go to die. A true highway to hell, as every vehicle that now crosses knows that it could be the next target of a drone named after a vengeful and furious goddess. Ukraine's strategy of battering Russian logistics along this highway is starting to work. As the New Voice of Ukraine reported on June 4th, the Azov Brigade of the Ukrainian National Guard announced that it had returned to Mariupol, which is a region that Russia has occupied since the beginning of Putin's invasion. Repeated strikes in April and May allowed the unit to effectively take control over the skies over the settlement. Ukraine's forces haven't penetrated on the ground, but they don't need to. With the Mariupol skies under its control, Ukraine has a clear path to the R280, which has allowed it to turn the highway into a hellscape. The short stretch of road between Melitopol and Crimea saw at least 17 strikes against Russian fuel and military trucks in May alone. In the Crimean city of Sevastopol, fuel rationing is already in effect, with customers being restricted to 20 litres per person, as fuel that was travelling along the Crimean land bridge burns. The Centre for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA, has even more remarkable figures. It says that analysis of maps reveal that Ukraine has hit over 125 trucks across the Crimean land bridge, with most of those vehicles being taken out in May. The longer-term consequences of the campaign are serious, but currently unquantifiable, CEPA declares, adding, "It is true, however, that almost all Russian logistics for the southern front and Crimea are land-based. If roads and rail are interrupted, damage is unavoidable." And that's the point. This is the logistics lockdown program in action, and it's having an effect. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense is pouring almost $113 million into this new program, which sees it incentivize Ukraine's drone operators to take out the vehicles that keep Russian logistics running. The R280 is a key target. Ukraine knows that cutting off that logistical lifeline will starve the Russian occupiers in Crimea of fuel that they need to defend their position. There is no safe Russian rear anymore. Drones like the Morrigan have made sure of that. Russia is getting desperate as it tries to keep the R280 open so that its troops in Crimea, Melitopol and Mariupol continue to receive their supplies. On May 30th, as it became clear that Ukraine's strikes against the R280 weren't going to let up, UNM reported that the Russian command had made some interesting changes to how the highway is used. A speed limit of 120 km per hour has been introduced, and Russian military convoys are now traveling at night. Russia has also started deploying some electronic warfare systems on the highway in a desperate attempt to send the Morrigan and Ukraine's other drones off course. Let's talk about the speed limit. 120 km per hour isn't the maximum speed that a military vehicle is supposed to reach on the R280. UNN says that it's the minimum. So let's get this straight. Russia's big plan for the R280 is to have its military convoys maintain dangerously fast speeds in the dark in the hope that Ukraine's drones won't be able to hunt them down. Somehow, we don't think that's going to work. We're basically watching speed play out in real time. Don't drop below 120 km per hour or you'll blow up. Look for accidents on top of drone strikes to start becoming a feature of the highway to hell that connects Russia to Crimea. Other solutions involve bypassing the R280 altogether, which is precisely what Russia doesn't want to do. The R280 was so important because it allowed Russia to send supplies on a straight shot to 3 occupied territories. The Morrigan has made it so that this isn't an option anymore, at least not for any convoys that want to avoid a nighttime death ride. But Russia doesn't really have a choice. The scale of the attacks on the R280 forced the Russian-backed governor of Kherson region, Vladimir Saldo, to order a closure of part of the highway on May 21st. Business Insider says that Russian officials in the occupied territories have reported that they're looking for alternatives as we speak. And one of those alternatives is one that Ukraine would love to see come into play: the Kerch Bridge. In a June 1st report, UKR Inform shared comments from the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Navy, Dmytro Pletenchuk. "I think we will eventually see the point where they are truly under pressure and will have no choice but to start transporting hazardous cargo across the bridge," Pletenchuk declared, adding, "There are serious restrictions in place regarding fuel shipments and railway transportation, both for safety reasons and because of the damage the so-called Crimean bridge suffered in the past." If Russia starts using the Kerch Bridge to transport fuel that is supposed to head along the R280, that would be a true sign of desperation. Why? Well, there's a reason why Russia stopped using that bridge for this specific purpose back in 2024. A pair of Ukrainian strikes in October 2022 and July 23 had already seriously damaged the bridge, leading the Russian High Command to determine that there was too much risk involved in transporting military cargo across the bridge. Ukraine proved Russia right in June 2025 when it hit the bridge again, this time with underwater explosives that targeted key supports. Ukraine has held off on attacking the Kerch Bridge since then. It hasn't needed to, as the bridge no longer serves a real military purpose. But if Russia's solution to its R280 problem is to start using the Kerch Bridge once more, then another key connection between Russia and Crimea is back on the menu. A nearly $5 billion project could go up in smoke as a symbol of Ukraine's domination over Russia in the Crimean arena. What we're seeing here is Ukraine's isolation strategy in play. Russia is damned no matter which option it takes. Every alternative route is in the range of the Morrigan or Ukraine's other mid-range drones. And with every strike that Ukraine completes, Russia's forces, as well as the 800,000 or so Russian civilians that are in Crimea, become further isolated. The stage is being set for liberation. Before we go deeper into that, it's worth looking at the bigger picture of what the emergence of the Morrigan means for the Ukraine war. What Ukraine has in the Morrigan is the latest entry into a growing arsenal of medium-range drones that it's using to cripple Russia in the occupied territories. We've already touched on why that matters when we told you about the logistics lockdown program that has set the stage for the destruction of so many of Russia's trucks on the R280. United 24 Media adds that it's not just logistics that are on the Ukrainian docket with its mid-range strikes. Russian air defenses are also being targeted. March and February each saw Ukraine destroy about 300 units of Russian air defenses, and Ukraine followed that up by taking out another 250 units in April. These strikes matter. Every air defense system Ukraine destroys with its mid-range drones either has to be replaced, which deprives Russia of air defenses elsewhere, or has to be abandoned. Either way, safe aerial corridors open up over the occupied territories, allowing Ukraine to strike deeper and harder at a wider array of other targets. That's what we're now seeing on the R280. Ukraine has created a highway to hell on the back of a strategy of taking out Russian air defenses over the last few months. This is a strategy that extends to all of the front line, as Ukraine is now at the point where it poses a threat against the Russian rear with drones that can strike around 200 kilometers deep. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, points out that Ukraine's mid-range strikes are slowing Russia down on the front to the point where Putin's patsies are achieving net gains that are so dangerously close to zero. Russia has been forced into a standstill. Plus, the rear being weakened so much also allows Ukraine to conduct counterattacks across limited areas of the front. We saw this most clearly in Dnipropetrovsk in May, where Ukraine liberated about 400 square kilometers of territory from Russia. Other gains have been made elsewhere, and they're all being made on the back of a medium-range strategy that is crippling Russia behind the front. None of this is happening by accident. The stats tell the full story. According to the new Voice of Ukraine, open-source intelligence analysis has revealed that Ukraine has carried out more than 1,000 geolocated strikes in the Russian rear. Bear in mind that these are confirmed strikes. There are likely many more. Around 7% of these strikes have targeted air defense systems, with 20% hitting transports and 35% targeting fuel, equipment, and ammo depots. Ukraine's approach is pretty simple. Take out what Russia needs behind the lines and the troops fighting on the front are weakened. And that brings us back to Crimea. Ukraine's overall goal with its strikes on the R280 is to isolate Russian troops that are being forced to push further back just to stand a chance of putting themselves out of range of the Morrigan and other Ukrainian drones. Ukraine isn't going to launch a land invasion of Crimea. That would be too risky. Instead, it's making the peninsula a non-factor in the war while tightening a stranglehold on supplies that is already leading to fuel shortages and other problems. All that Ukraine has to do now is keep up the tempo and then push on from there. And its genius strategy is starting to make believers out of people who may have once thought that Ukraine could never stand a chance of liberating Crimea. One of those people is retired former commanding general of US Army Europe, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. He confirms everything we just said about Ukraine's strategy for Crimea. It sounds a bit simplistic, but the first phase, leading up to the liberation of Crimea, is to isolate it, cut off the road to Jankoy, and destroy the bridge. The second is to render it unusable, impossible for the Russians to use, Hodges said. Simplistic that strategy may be, but Ukraine is following it perfectly. The roads are already being cut off and Russia can't find alternatives no matter how hard it scrambles. The Kerch Bridge will be a target as soon as Russia is desperate enough to use it for military purposes. And bit by bit, Crimea is being turned into a territory that is impossible for Russia to use for anything other than its missile and drone attacks against Ukrainian cities. This is how Crimea will be liberated. Not by an army marching onto the peninsula, but by a campaign of isolation that forces Putin to realize that the juice is no longer worth the squeeze. The rise of the Morrigan drone is just the latest part of a Crimean campaign that Ukraine has been executing for months. Russia's land bridge being choked off is a critical part of that campaign, as the battlefield around the peninsula is being reshaped. We dig even deeper into what this strategy really means in another video, so check it out to see how the liberation of Crimea feels closer than ever before. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show so you don't miss what we have coming next. And thank you, as always, for watching.